Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to ozcastnetwork.com for details.
Welcome to Hong Kong Confidential. I'm Jules Hannaford and I'm your host. I'm an Australian woman and I've been living in Hong Kong for many years. I'm a mother, a teacher, an author, and I want to share my wisdom and the wisdom of others with you. Thanks for joining me and I hope you enjoy the show.
You meet someone online and there's this instant connection. It's amazing how much the two of you just seem to click. They live somewhere far away and there's some plausible reason they can't travel to meet you. They tell you they're in love with you and you feel optimistic for the first time in a long time. They have a successful career, yet somehow they need money from you to solve a short-term problem, always with the promise of paying you back. Time goes on and they need more money more urgently. You've started to see the cracks and begin to wonder whether they've been lying this whole time. All of a sudden it hits you. You've been scammed. Fool Me Twice is the story of my mother, Jules Hannaford, a woman who was drawn into the dangerous world of sweetheart scams. After a trip overseas to meet a stranger, a dangerous altercation in a Manchester hotel room, and thousands of pounds lost for good, she's here to tell her story. Fool Me Twice, a true crime podcast, is available on Apple Podcasts, Ozcast Network, and anywhere you listen to your podcasts.
Today I'm here with Rish Tandapany. Hi Rish, thanks for joining me today.
Hi Jules, nice to be here. Thanks for having me.
Rish, where are you from and how did you become a coach?
I'm originally from the UK. I grew up there, was educated there. I then spent the majority of my working life in Asia, actually, and obviously a combination background, parents of Indian origin. And the coaching involved multiple hurdles to cross. I started off on a traditional corporate ladder, basically working in the banking arena for several years. And then pretty much around 2 years ago, I realized that actually my work involving individuals was actually more important to me than, say, the strategy or the success of the industry I was in. I realized that I was pretty good at that in terms of mentoring people, bringing the best out of them and potentially harnessing their strengths and goals into better things. About 2 years ago, I decided to pursue a coaching career. I did it in tandem with my corporate career for a while. The intention was just to help people I work with in a more formal setting. And then earlier this year, I decided to do it full time. And I decided specifically in Asia, where I believe that the coaching arena was not as fully fledged as it was in Western countries. And just generally where I think there's a lot more topical issues to have a discussion about. That's kind of how I got there, massively fulfilling role and something I enjoy.
Rish, do you think it's unusual to find male coaches in this industry?
I wouldn't say it's unusual. I think the most unusual thing about the dynamic between men and women coaches is that male clients tend to go for male coaches and female clients tend to go for female coaches. I don't necessarily notice there being a significant difference in the amount of male and female coaches. I think this is important because I think if you look at other industries, whether it's banking, films, etc., especially after the Me Too movement, there's a lot of conscious people about who they're interacting with and specifically who they share their secrets with. On a coaching platform, you're always a bit wary that women clients will always prefer a female coach and male clients may not have a view, but they tend to prefer male coaches as well. And that tends to make sense given the hormonal differences, the gender differences, and the upbringing differences of being a man and a woman. I personally feel that more women coaches need to be encouraged to join that. And there needs to be more of a cross-gender dynamic. Women coaches need to reach out to their male audiences and male coaches need to reach out to their female audiences. But that is happening over time.
What percentage would you say of your clients are male and female at the moment?
I would have said pre-COVID, it would have been about 50-50, but definitely with COVID coming in, it's definitely slanted more towards the female. I've got about 70% of female clients now. And I think that's reflective of a couple of things, especially in Asia where the amount of time people spend socializing has dropped dramatically. And women tend to have, generally speaking, women tend to have stronger, closer group of friends than men. Men tend to be more varied and quantity-wise have more friends but less close friends. I think that's shown with COVID coming. I've noticed that females have more to say. With working from home, with dealing with different dynamics, with raising children at home, dating from home, things like that, they generally need much more of an outlet. So I put that down to the reason why the female amount has gone up. And long may it continue, because I do notice that our clients in particular tend to have much more to say than male clients. And that's generally because females tend to be slightly more agreeable. They tend to be open when they have these discussions with coaches. And it's not to say that all men are like that, but definitely there's a level of openness with females that you tend not to get with men, at least initially.
Would you say that women are more open and sort of speak more about their issues because they're used to opening up more with their female friends, whereas men don't tend to go into sort of deep and meaningful conversations with each other about what's troubling them or how they're feeling? Is that a fair assessment?
I think that's a fair assessment. I mean, the word I like to use a lot with men is bravado, and coaching, psychotherapy, whichever branch of guidance or help that anyone is seeking needs to be done without that sense of bravado. And men automatically see that. A lot of men automatically see this idea of taking advice from someone else, especially another man, as a loss of faith or something that they're not necessarily comfortable with doing. And I think the dynamics of women in which they tend to get into groups, have these difficult conversations, but also invest their emotions in their conversations a lot more than men, has led them into this kind of path. And I speak about it from a session by session basis. A lot of my first sessions with females is going straight into it, them releasing their emotions, their feelings, their intentions. Whereas a lot of my first sessions with male clients is getting them out of their shell, persuading them that actually talking isn't a bad thing. You don't lose any face. I think in Asia, it's slightly better than Western cultures. I think Asian men are slightly more accommodating to that. But it goes to a lot of the other topics we're going to touch on later. It's a sense of what society expects from you. And I think females are much less responsive to that than men are at the moment.
You mentioned earlier that your numbers have kind of increased during COVID. Why do you think that is?
COVID, it's like any pandemic or any plague over the years. It's kind of thrown the world into a level of disarray that people are just not accustomed to. There's always a quick solution. There's always some form of solution to any of the dilemmas we have, whether it's terrorist event, terrorist attack, or loss of job or whatever. COVID is just an unknown and probably something we won't see again in as significant a way in our lifetime. And I think that's forced people to several things. One is to deal with loneliness. And loneliness doesn't just mean being alone. It means you being caught up with yourself for an extended period of time without distractions. I think the second thing is the economic decline that we've seen, whether it's Hong Kong, Singapore, the rest of the world. There's an decline that makes you think about your future and what you're doing. And the third thing I'd say is people are a bit more aware that there are other outlets than friends and family. So if you, to use an example, if I'm a guy and I break up with my partner, traditionally I may have gone for a few beers with my friends, had a reasonably open discussion about it, or reached out to my brother, etc. But you just can't do that in this day and age. I mean, a Zoom call is effective and any type of online communication is effective, but to a limit. And you don't get a hug from a Zoom call. You don't get a hug from those kind of mechanisms. So I think coaches in a position to offer clients something and a bit more emotive without the risk of being judged. And that's something I noticed between July and August in particular, when I think cases were significantly high. People just needed an outlet and they didn't want to be judged by their family. They didn't want to be judged by their friends. And they sought coaches, therapists, relationship coaches to help handle their problems. And so in a way, I feel bad because mine is one of the few industries, I guess, that has flourished out of COVID. I hope it sets a good tone going forward so that people can deal with their emotions in a more structured way.
Rish, what do you think some of the key issues are that your clients face?
Majority of issues revolve around relationships, and they don't ever start off revolving around relationships. What actually manifests is someone will come to you and say, I'm having trouble losing weight, or I'm having trouble with my job. And then you kind of backtrack. A normal coach's process is to backtrack the root cause of that problem. And I would say at least 7 to 8 out of 10 times, it manifests itself into some level of a relationship dynamic, either causes of low self-esteem, bullying, lack of closeness, these type of things. So the majority of my clients coming to me with, is it the right time to start a family? My husband thinks no, because economic decline has meant it's going to be more difficult to take care of a family. But then my parents are pushing me. Is now a nice time, especially in a place like Hong Kong, to migrate, where you've got political and social issues there at the moment. But it all comes back to the root cause, which ultimately is some level of a relationship, whether it's relationship between husband and wife, boyfriend, girlfriend, employer, employee. Even one of my clients has a very toxic relationship with their pet. He's a Korean guy. So a lot of it comes back to that. I'd say the second most common issue or challenge that I'm dealing with clients is them questioning their own mental health. And this is quite prevalent now in society, especially when, to an extent, mental health is no longer a rare thing. Okay, people are dealing with these issues on a day-to-day basis and they're becoming publicized by the news, and there's a lot of information floating around about it. So a lot of people out there questioning, do they have a mental health issue or are they just overthinking? And talking them through that process is often both interesting and scary at the same time, because mental health is always one of those taboo subjects. It's something that governments haven't necessarily invested the right amount of funds and attention to in the past. And now people are having to read a lot about these things online. And that's not always the best thing, because you may just link yourself to a problem. But between those two issues, as well as a variety of other issues, I think people are just starting or learning how to cope with their thought process. And that's what attracts me the most. Breaking down why you think about things in certain ways, the logic behind it, the understanding behind it. It's the only free will that we really have, is the ability to think for ourselves. And a lot of people aren't comfortable doing that. So my job is predominantly to help walk them through that process.
What sort of tips do you give people to improve their mental health? What can people do to stop feeling so low or stop feeling anxious and things like that, especially during COVID?
It's very much an individual case-by-case basis. My general advice to everyone, as soon as I start any advice session, is think of a time when you were happy. And when you think of a time when you were happy, there's usually a set of steps that have led you to that level of happiness, whether it's you did well at work, or you received a present, or you went to the gym for an extended period of time, and try to replicate that process. And that's important, because with a coach or with a therapist or anything, you're trying to figure out your own thought process. Get out of that lull, take yourself back to a time where you are happy and just replicate it. And one of the things I do as a personal thing when I feel slightly down is I go and eat food. It's my go-to solution for everything. Actually, everything I was feeling slightly bad or pensive about has suddenly kind of dropped down the priority list. So that's usually my first piece of advice. The other piece of advice that I give people is about organizing their lives somewhat. And what I mean by that isn't, cleaning your desk and making your bed. It's more like listing the items in your life that are of importance to you. So most mental health, anxiety, depression issues come about when external factors suddenly come into play and you feel out of control. So COVID is a very good example, because you're out of control. You can't see your parents when you potentially went to see them every 2 days afterwards. You can't see your partner because you're living in two different sides of Hong Kong. And these external factors will always be there. So ensure that the organized internal factors going on in your life are going reasonably well. And that's usually things like your health, your sexual relationship, your TV routine, making sure that things in your house are clean and proper and things like that. And then you can start to work on the external factors, because once you have an internal chaotic regime going on, anything that you bring into that is inevitably going to lead to some level of anxiety or some problematic issue. So that's usually the way I walk through my problems with clients. The other thing is to actually ask yourself, do you have that mental health problem? Okay. And I think this is really, really important, because especially you see this a lot with Gen Zs and millennials. There's so much literature about a person of that age having a problem. And it's easy to read that literature and say, oh my God, I felt the same. It's actually what I was going through. That may not have been the same. And you're kind of linking yourself and you're getting into that kind of group think habit of attaching yourself to a problem.
It's kind of like Dr. Google, isn't it? We all go to Google, put in our symptoms and then kind of self-diagnose. And often people go to the worst case scenario.
It's exactly like that. And it's a human tendency to go to that worst case scenario. And this is something I think socially we need to change. And a very good example of this is the news. I mean, I can't remember the last time I went to a news channel and saw a positive piece of news. And the news can be framed in a way where it's positive. It could be, oh, we solved 50% of COVID cases in the last 24 hours. It's not 500 people got sick in the last 24 hours. And this is the problem with a lot of the societies that I'm working with, especially there's a lot of misinformation. Positivity is not general. Okay, I think negativity is much more generally out there than positivity. But getting your clients or getting even your friends and family to take a step back and detach themselves from that negativity is usually the first step to any process. And I personally feel that's important, because negativity is also very easy to absorb and it's contagious. And if you're constantly hanging around or married or associating with a bunch of negative people, you just generally tend to be negative yourself. And that's how a lot of anxiety and depression comes about. It's the low self-esteem that your partner creates with you. It's the bullying that you feel at work. You actually have no genuine reason to feel low self-esteem, but the environment has dictated that. And I think it's important to get clients to step out of that environment and think about the good things in life. It sounds very cliche. It sounds very Love Actually and Notting Hill like, but that's the reality of it. Look at the positive things in your life, and then you'll tend naturally to think of less negative things.
We were talking a little bit before about relationships and how they're often the cornerstone of the issues that people face that come to you. Do you feel that true love exists, or are we told what love is and how to love?
I do believe true love exists. And I think there's enough evidence out there, whether it's partners who've been with each other for 50 years and still have a smile on their face, there's enough evidence and stories out there to suggest that there is this underlying current of true love that does exist somewhere in the world. I think it has slowed down significantly, though. And the rationale behind that is socially, we've become much more open and much more critical of our feelings. And I think if this was a conversation we were having maybe in the 1950s or 60s, there was a stereotype and a placeholder towards love, and you did not question it that much, okay? Whereas now, socially, the young generation in particular can question that, put tangents on it, put other caveats to those feelings. I don't think there's really a right or wrong answer as to whether we need to be in love. I think it's very, very subjective. Very much depends on what you're trying to get out of a relationship. And I just don't want people to stop looking for it, okay? That's my major aim. I think whether it's a platonic relationship, a demisexual relationship, a homosexual relationship, whatever it is something everyone should be looking for. Whether you find it or not is a cultural, social dynamic which may or may not exist given your circumstances. It's interesting because I've noticed, and this is especially prevalent in Hong Kong recently, where a lot of couples got divorced and then remarried within a kind of 2 to 3 year window, suggests that the definition of love either can apply to multiple people or that people didn't necessarily understand what true love was at the time when they got married. And this is becoming very prevalent. I've talked to a lot of my clients who come to me and say, well, how do I know I'm not going to make the same mistake as the first time? How do I know that this is the one? Okay, and that's one of the most common phrases used. And I just tell them, look, at the end of the day, it's about feelings. I think you need to avoid as much literature, as much social media talk on this. It's about personal feelings. It's exactly the same way why I like a croissant over a donut, or for you to use a very simple analogy. I think a lot of people don't look internally and say, this guy actually, or this conjured a special feeling within me, and that translates to love. Instead, they look at, oh, my girlfriends have been taken to Paris, or my boyfriends have been taken snorkeling in the Philippines, and they associate these level of examples with love and strength of relationships, which I think is becoming more common.
Do you think that dating apps play into the situation with people at the moment where there's such an immediacy of being able to hook up with people and meet people quite often, and so people sort of shy away from love more than they used to because they want to have this kind of dating lifestyle?
So I think dating apps play multiple roles. I think you've got the casual sex element to a dating app. You just need someone who you don't really want to invest that much time in, but you have an immediate need for sex. There's also an idea that you've just given up with the traditional means of dating, right? Your friends recommending you someone, or you going to a bar, whatever. And it's a bit like buying a commodity in a supermarket, buying a bed, right? You just kind of go to the store, jump on the bed, and I'm going to get it. And I think commoditizing marriage and sexuality has become quite prevalent with these dating apps. I generally think it's quite a positive thing, especially, and COVID has shown that it is reasonably positive. I think people still need to have a both sexual and partnership lifestyle without the need to go out and meet people at bars. So there's obviously been a demand for it. I think what we need to be careful is that the app and the technology itself doesn't devalue the underlying feelings of why people are going there. So if you go to Tinder, for example, there is a whole spiel, or there's at least several lines where you can write a description of yourself. And how many people actually take the time to do that? And I'm pretty sure a reduced amount. And then it's an even more reduced amount of people who actually read that description. So everything is becoming very superficial on the surface. And I think that's somewhere where I think other dating apps, which I've read about, kind of help, where you leave a voice where it's a slightly more sapiosexual orientated, where there's a personality behind it, and intelligence behind it. And I think that will be the way forward, more than that superficial layer that we're currently seeing at the moment.
Well, there you go. There's a business plan for you in the future.
I really do think that the getting to know you part of relationship has been dramatically minimized. And that's whether you're friends, partners, even animals, the analogy I gave just now, animals, people do not spend enough getting to know each other. And if I met someone today at a bus stop and he said his name is John Smith, I'd be so tempted now to go on Google and say, who's John Smith, right? And you've got LinkedIn, you've got Facebook, you've got Instagram, and suddenly you have a impression of what John Smith is actually like. But the real John Smith is someone you actually need to talk to. He's the guy who probably maybe stutters. He's the guy who maybe puts too much sugar in his coffee. And those are intrinsic pieces of knowledge which you're only going to know from forging a bond, which can't necessarily be done online.
That's the thing. People can create whatever persona they want online. They can really put any foot forward online. And you really need to meet somebody to connect with them to see if it really is real. This is why I talk so much about not falling in love online without having met somebody, because it's just not necessarily real.
You know this firsthand. I mean, it's not only not real, it can be dangerous at times. And it kind of lends into another topic we were going to talk about, which is this kind of body image of people. I mean, you effectively creating a social media reality versus the real world reality, right? So if you've got two personas floating around sometimes with people, sometimes even more. And I think that can be dangerous after a while, not only for the individual to engage with them and get into relationships, but also for the person themselves, because they kind of lose tact as to, or lose control as to who is the actual Rish. Okay, is it the online Rish, or is it the Rish who goes home and sits there and watches Netflix or whatever? So I think that's a danger that's coming our way.
Would you say that it's more difficult in this day and age to actually find love?
It's not difficult to find love. It's difficult to find true love. Okay. And the reason I phrase it that way is I think love can be a conjured emotion. Okay. I think if I want a partner who looks like Megan Fox and is a lawyer and has two dogs and lives in Kowloon, I could probably go through enough social media posts to find some, maybe not Megan Fox, but I could probably find enough social media posts to find someone like that. That's a constructed version of what I want. Like I said, it's commoditized to an extent.
It's like falling in love with an ideal, isn't it? A fantasy in your head.
And it's a bit like The Matrix. I mean, if you've ever seen the movie The Matrix, where you've got the real world and you've got the Matrix, there are people that actually like to be in the Matrix. And I think the digital means we have now allow people to try to flesh out this constructed ideal that you mentioned. If you're looking for true love, it's going to be a bit more hard work. I mean, it's very rare that people meet their true love very, very early. And also, I think the idea with true love, it's a very two-way thing. And the reason I say two-way is I think it makes you think about yourself a bit more. When there's a true love element to a relationship, it makes you think about yourself. There's a level of sacrifice, unconditional elements. And that's maybe when you're going down the road of true love versus kind of commoditized love or conceptualized love. But it's a very interesting question. I think the other important question, just to at this point, is do people care about being in love at the moment? And I notice this, and I speak to a lot of clients, and without going into too much detail, a lot of people have an ideal of what their life at 30 or 40 or 50 should be. And especially in Hong Kong, where a lot of the Chinese culture dictates that you look after your parents, you have to have 2.4 children, they have to go to a good school, you have to drive a Honda Civic. You flesh out that idea. It doesn't really matter who that male or female figure is who helps you bring out that idea. The idea is more important. And I see a lot of people jumping into relationships and in relationships at the moment who they are very, very obsessed with the person that their partner could be, not with the person their partner is. And I think that is arranged marriages in India and China, sure, that can work, but often it's a very dangerous road, especially if you need some level of emotional attachment and feeling. And this exactly explains why the divorce rate is soaring in Asian countries at the moment.
Do you think it's important for people to have relationships and sex for their well-being?
My personal view is that it very much depends on the individual. I mean, if you look down the evolutionary track of how we got to where we are, there's enough scientific evidence to suggest that there is a sexual element of all of us, and to suggest that we need that for reproductive purposes, but also from a hormonal balance perspective. So there's that line of thought. But I think one of the things that's come up, especially since kind of mid-90s, is this idea that there isn't just one level of sexuality. You've got platonic relationships now, you've got demisexual relationships, you've got sapiosexual relationships. And these words didn't necessarily, or these articulation of these words didn't necessarily exist, say, 50 years ago, when sexual intimacy and sexual relations was thought very much from a very standardized binary point of view. Okay. So to answer your question, I think if you have the underlying feelings to do those things, okay? And I don't think you should question or critique a person who says that they have sexual needs. I don't think we should reach that stage of the society. And that's tricky for some people, especially women, when they go out there and they say, hey, I actually have a certain amount of desires and passions that I want to fulfill. They automatically get judged by usually men around them, and it doesn't lead to anywhere positive. So I think understanding what drives that person is a really important point. There are genuinely people out there who want strictly platonic relationships, who don't feel any ounce of sexual desire towards their partner, but it still works. So I think it's about understanding the individual, and I think it's not pushing social stereotypes too forward. You're not a strong male if you're red-blooded and Brad Pitt and going out there finding loads of guys to get the next girl. That's not how it works anymore. And I think that's just how society's evolved.
Of course, there's single people as well who maybe would like to have a partner, but they can't find one or they don't have one. Just not always an option for some people to be in a relationship or to have sex. And of course, as you say, some people are asexual, some people like different partners, some like monogamy. Everybody varies. So I think it really is down to the individual.
And which makes it really tough when you're in geographies or countries where there are certain rules and laws that you being yourself, shall we say. Okay. And go back to one of the early questions you asked me about my kind of client makeup. One of the things that I'm seeing more and more, not huge amounts over the new year, but is the gay community also coming out. And it was always taboo, especially in Hong Kong travel, with the Chinese cultural element of Hong Kong, that being homosexual was taboo for a very long time. And a lot of men, especially in their 20s, are coming to coaches, and I speak to some of my colleagues, and saying, I'm ready to come out. I'm ready to put it out there, and I'm ready to face the challenges that my family throw at me, the society throws at me, because I'm just too stressed and anxious trying to hide this. So I think it's socially something that we need to just discuss more. I think the stereotypes of being called a slut, for instance, need to go away. The gay stereotypes need to go away. And we need to be much more open. And that would be really helpful if governments are open to those conversations as well.
Yeah, it's a shame that there are so many countries in the world still where it's illegal to be gay. It's abhorrent and it shouldn't exist. But hopefully things will change as time goes on, and hopefully quickly. But sadly, it's not going to change in some places.
100%.
It's a shame. Let's talk a little bit more about body dysmorphia. Is that something that you deal with your clients, and how might you help somebody who suffers from this?
It's becoming slightly more prevalent in the age of Instagram. I have to say, maybe beginning of my coaching career, it wasn't maybe a handful of cases. And, let's just get body dysmorphia out the way in terms of what it means. And everyone automatically associates it with image and you being unhappy with the way you look. And that can manifest as your whole body. It can also manifest as just having a mole on your nose. It's just something that gives you a level of anxiety and insecurity that makes you, A, question the way you look, and B, question how other people look at you. And Instagram has just been bad for this, is the only way to put it. And that's because you see a lot of people judging how they should look based on what they see on these social media devices. What we try to do is to kind of understand this from a very, very emotional perspective. I mean, what are the emotions you feel when you look at yourself? And what you get to is a stage where actually the drivers of the anger, the drivers of the body dysmorphia is actually how you're looking at others, not how you're looking at yourself. If you just look at yourself, you can be quite neutral about it. But when you compare yourself to someone else, that's when it becomes dangerous, and that's where it gets complicated. So the cases are going, really interesting point. And Hong Kong, a bit like Singapore where I am, the influencer realm has kind of just exploded. And you get a lot of clients, I get a lot of clients who come to me at 9 o'clock in the morning. They've put the most perfect Instagram picture, six-pack out, and he's in the gym and he's working out and he looks amazing. And then by 3 o'clock when he's having a session with me, he's still anxious about how he looks. So a lot of people who are actually promoting a lot of this imagery that contributes to body dysmorphia are actually going through it themselves. I think that's one thing. So I don't think it's easy just blaming influencers who project a kind of artificial view of the world out there. I think the other reality is advertising, marketing, the media have got a big role to play in this. Whether we like to admit it, and we saw it a lot with what goes on in Hollywood and the Weinstein thing with Me Too and things, there's a sexualized element to a lot of industries and a lot of sub-industries that are going on. And I think if the media and advertising in particular don't help make that uniform and push in directions where people feel comfortable with whoever they look at or look like, it's going to be very, very difficult. So I think it's a really big problem. I'm actually doing a few sessions over the next month of influencers in Hong Kong, actually, where we will be talking about this quite aggressively. And you've got people who have a very strong view that actually it's a bit like obesity. If you're fat, just get over it, go to the gym, solve your problem. And then you've got people who are much more inclined to think, I think, along the lines of we do, which is to help people think through that process. Not everyone is obese because they eat too much. They're obese for genetic reasons at points of time. They're obese because of bullying, so no self-esteem reasons. And it's going to be interesting over the next few weeks when I have these conversations with body dysmorphia experts and clients to see what they actually think. And I think it's important as a society, whilst we value each other's opinions, we come up with a view that helps people get through that process.
You don't have to be overweight to have body dysmorphia. It can come for people for any shape and size. You can just be insecure or unhappy and I think there's a difference, isn't there, between body dysmorphia and then just feeling unhappy with the way that you look. Like body dysmorphia, you have a real hatred for parts of your body or for your whole body, and you don't see it how it actually looks. Is that correct?
That's correct. So the body dysmorphia is very obsessive. It's like I said, if you have a mole behind your left ear, that is a form of body dysmorphia if you don't like or you're obsessing about having that mole behind your left ear. And the other angle which you touched on is just genuinely being unhappy with how you look. And if there are genuine reasons why you want to change the way you look, then I think you should change the way you look. And if it makes you a better person. But I think going back to the influence of media, K-pop is a huge, I don't say problem, but challenge at the moment, because you've got these K-pop celebrities now who just look a certain way. And now you've got a big proportion of society, both men and women, who want to look like their respective K-pop superstar. And countries like Korea don't help that because they don't show you the bad side of that. They don't show you what the person has gone through to look like that. The problem with the K-pop society is suicide. There's a huge suicide rate in the society. So it's very easy with misinformation to project the positives of looking a certain way without actually seeing the whole story. And I think this is going to be important in places like Hong Kong, where influencers have an unnecessarily high level of influence across the population. And they should be using that for more beneficial reasons other than just kind of coercing people to look a certain way.
What advice do you give people to help them to feel happier in their own skin?
This is one of the more challenging parts of coaching because you can't lie to a person. So if someone is, for instance, if someone has a mole on the back of their right ear, you can't tell them that they don't have a mole on the back of their right ear. So you have to understand that the thought process as to why they link the mole to a negative emotion. And then what you get when you go down that road is that, actually, that girl doesn't have a mole, or that guy had his mole removed. And suddenly you've got associative factors that you can link to the problem. So it's about helping them understand why those particular elements of their body that they don't like actually don't matter, or that enough people around them like those elements. And usually, and this is something that's very hard to tell clients, is to step back away from external influences. And what I mean by that is, as a guy, if I'm constantly looking at men's health and I see on every page there's a guy with a six-pack and I don't have a six-pack, let's say, then the external factor is making you think about things that you probably shouldn't be doing. And a very good example of this is when I was in corporate life. Whenever a member of staff used to come to see me, another member of staff that would see literally be looking, why is he going into Rich's office? Why is he going to Rich's office? And it absolutely had nothing to do with them. And the same way, a guy having a six-pack in men's health doesn't necessarily have anything to do with it. So it's about removing those external factors from their life, or at least trying to show them that those external factors don't matter. One of the things you can do with very, very stubborn cases is to use those external factors as motivation. Okay, but you have to be very careful about that, because what you don't want is to make them even more unhappy or see it as a challenge. But it's really, really difficult. One of the best things, and this goes to any type of coaching or therapy, is to speak to people who've gone through it themselves. And this is one of the reasons I like to do corporate coaching, is because it fits into my realm, especially the relationship side of it. So the same way with body dysmorphia, speak to people that have gone through that. If you've got bulimia, for example, no one is going to understand you better than another recovering bulimia patient. Putting yourself in those social groups, in those networks, are quite beneficial. And this is one of the ways I wish social media was a bit more proactive in creating and funneling those groups in a more promoted and marketed way, because I think people are looking for those type of things. If you are a girl who wants to lose weight, it makes sense that you would seek advice from people who've gone through that, who are going through that with you. And things like the podcast help, and things like other networks do help. I think that's an important point, but never make the mistake of trying to understand 100% what they're going through. If you go down that route, you're destined to fail because every individual is an individual. Every individual does see something slightly differently. It's a really complicated one, Jules. I wish I had a prescribed answer for every client, but it's tough.
I think it's also worth mentioning that weight loss groups or groups for people with mental health issues can be dangerous if they're not regulated. And if people are in there starting to compete with each other or giving each other tips, I just think we've got to be careful sort of recommending people find these kind of groups online because you don't know what you're getting into and they can prove to be very destructive and dangerous.
100%. And I think this is where levels of kind of accreditation and expertise add a big value to it. So if listeners are thinking about joining groups, definitely do your due diligence, do that process of understanding who actually started this group and why. Make sure it's not just a forum for bashing each other, like you mentioned. But problem shared is problem solved usually, right? And I like that. And one of the things that we're trying to morph in the coaching world now is kind of group coaching, getting people together and just about talking things out. And I think this is the benefit, like I mentioned earlier, of having a coach. When you talk to someone who's not judging you or who doesn't have a vested interest being a family member or a friend, it does help.
For sure. It does definitely helps to talk. How do you find coaching online compared to coaching in person? And do you think this could be the way of the future?
I definitely think it could be the way of the future. And that's with any industry at the moment. You're going through this kind of post-COVID lull, right? And this pandemic has taken such a toll on physical employment and physical relationships that I definitely just think it's part of the future. Is it easy? And what do I think of it? I think it's difficult. I think earning trust or earning a level of trust online is always going to be markedly harder than earning it in person. There are so many subtle psychological elements to meeting in person. You have body language, smell, aura that help you both as a client and as a coach. And that's something I miss. The ability to look into someone's eyes and see a reaction or just see a facial tick. And that also helps me analyze the problem I have. But we've been dealt the cards that we have with COVID. And I think, like I said before, with the online world, we just need to maximize it. And what we don't want to do is make sure that mental health, helping people with mental health problems or issues doesn't fall into the trap. Some dating websites where people are looking for a one-stop solution for everything. You have to choose your funnel or your medium or your technology carefully. You have to choose the coach carefully as well. And hopefully they don't sacrifice that just because online tends to be faster. So it's a difficult question. I missed it. You missed the physical coaching. The client levels have gone up significantly during COVID because people feel a certain level of anonymity and relaxation of doing things online as well. And a lot of my coaching clients, after I've had an initial kind of email conversation with them, they say, do you mind if we do the first session without the cameras on? And online does provide that level of anonymity. A lot of people are worried about how they're perceived, how they look, how they're being judged on a screen. So if you're going to take a benefit or positive of being online, I'd say that's definitely one of them.
Rish, what advice do you have for people to create opportunities for themselves for better self-care?
One of the big things that's on my agenda for everybody that I coach and just generally people in my circle is to set goals. I find that if you have a routine, if you set a realistic set of goals that are achievable, you tend to be distracted with achieving that and not the negative sides or some of the more questionable sides of your life. When dealing with self-care and understanding your mental health situation, have a plan. Don't stay in this lull of depreciation and worry and negativity. Turn things into positive, turn them into more achievable goals at first and then longer term achievable goals. I think the other important point, just so understated, is ensure that the people around you are the people who are giving the best for you and to you. And this is really, really important. And I'm sure you know from your own experiences that sometimes you have people who latch onto you just because you're going through a bad time and it makes them feel better. And sometimes you have people who genuinely love and care for you to an extent that they're willing to sacrifice their own time and attention to help you go through that. So I think that net circle and sphere of influence with friends and family is really important. My major concern and the major thing that I hope changes in Asia is that actually people don't really need too many coaches 5-10 years down the line. And my rationale behind that is that people, especially friends and family, get to a more amicable and less judgmental stage where people can just open up to their loved ones. And this is something I always recommend to married couples or partners. Try before you reach out to a coach or a friend, try to do that with your partner. Or if you don't have a partner, do it to your friend, or do it to your mom or your dad, or do it to your brother or sister. But that's a really important bridge that I want to help build. I still think there's a huge percentage of people out there who do not feel comfortable speaking to their loved ones about everything. And it sounds wrong, but it's the reality of what we're going through. And I hope people take that leap. And I hope the loved ones are there showing them the care and attention that they need.
And Rish, to finish up, what are some of the greatest challenges you face in your work?
The predominant challenge at the moment is to help everyone. That sounds quite vague, but there's such a variety of issues and problems that get channeled your way. And it's very easy to sometimes feel that as a coach, especially online, you don't necessarily see the tangible results of your work. Someone can come into a session and be positive, and someone can come into a session and say that they're happier. But you don't get the opportunity to necessarily go into the future a few months down the line and look at them in a coffee shop or see how their marriage is going now. You don't have the luxury of that. So that's quite hard to do. I find that challenge quite hard because you're always questioning yourself as a coach. What's going on with Jules? What's going on with Steve? And that sometimes can bring you down a bit. As a coach, you have to be wary of that. I think the other big challenge at the moment is sometimes be honest to say that you don't have an answer to everything. And this is quite difficult when someone's coming to you for help. But I haven't been through every relationship experience or every stress experience. So for me to go out there and say I have an answer which is sometimes what clients are looking for, a direct pill or a direct answer or a direct website where they can get everything. That is sometimes not going to work. And you need to take a step back and just help them walk through that process and come to a stage where you've got as far as you can go. And those are the major challenges I find at the moment. The other challenge, which I think you kind of alluded to in the past, is having governments and institutions, NGOs, supporting this type of discussion that we're having. I think that these discussions are still being had very much in the private sphere between thought leaders and podcasters and people writing articles, but they're not really being had at a government level. And when you talk about things like funding and you talk about things like social change, you need a level of government involvement to make that accelerate and become faster. So one of the things I'm trying my best to do with Trynkle is engage with governments, get them to realize that they don't have the answers to everything, but they're definitely part of the solution. And that is a very, very big challenge because obviously governments have vested interests and personalities and things like that. So those are the main challenges, but I won't stop. Someone needs to push these issues across, and people like us are doing our best to do that.
Good on you. That's great. Finally, what do you love most about your work as a coach?
Meeting as many types of people as possible. So it's like someone who, you ask some people, what's their favorite movie? And they'll say, oh, horror movies. Or I'm the type of person who loves every movie genre. And every client is different. And whilst the underlying current of their situations may be quite similar, you're never going to match them one-to-one. There's never going to be a like-for-like case. And I love that. I love the fact that one day I can meet someone who has been so successful for 30 years and share with me those levels of success and maybe going through a problem that I can help. And then the next day, someone who's traveled to 150 countries in the world, but now wants to tell us, so there's a variety there, which I love. And for me, everything comes back to a layer of social thinking. And I want people to think in a clear, logical way and make sure that socially we're moving forward. And the more people you meet, the more events that you document, the more data that you collect, it's beneficial. And it's making me much more wiser as a coach, making me much more motivated as a coach to go out there and find these people. And I'm seeing slowly the rewards socially of coaching and therapy as a platform.
Rish, how can my listeners find you if they'd like to get in touch with you to find out more about some of these topics you've talked about or to have coaching with you?
The easiest way would be through our website, which is www.trynkle.com. That's Trynkle. And through our Instagram, which is @Trynkle. There's a lot of articles, there's a lot of information on there, which people should read. I mean, a lot of people, prospective clients, go to the website and then realize, they don't need coaching. They just need to maybe take a step back and think about things that way, which is definitely okay and something valuable to them. And anyone wants to reach out, please do. Please don't be shy. I have quite a big following and client base in Hong Kong in particular at the moment, which is going really, really well. And I know with post-Christmas, pre-Chinese New Year, there's always tensions floating around, and then people are worried about going to the gym, money, the COVID situation at the moment. So please do reach out through either of those means, and we'll do our best to guide you.
Thank you so much, Rish, for coming on my podcast. It's been a pleasure. And thanks a lot for sharing your wisdom with us.
Thank you, Jules, and appreciate the work you're doing. It's fantastic to have people like you pushing these topics across.
Thank you so much. And for my listeners out there, If this is something that you've enjoyed, please can you share it with your friends and family? And if you can go to iTunes to rate and review us, that'd be amazing. It'll help get me up the iTunes charts, and it will help people find Rish and his company, Trynkle. And if anyone's interested in getting in touch with Rish, I'll put his Instagram and his website in the show notes. So thanks again, Rish.
Thank you.
Hi, Confidants. I want to tell you about my Patreon page. I've joined Patreon in the hope of getting sponsorship for my Hong Kong Confidential podcast. Patreon is a great way for my listeners to get on board and sponsor me with monthly payments, and that goes towards my production costs and rewards for my members. If you're interested in checking out my Patreon page, please go to patreon.com and search up Jules Hannaford or Hong Kong Confidential. I would really appreciate you visiting my page. So that brings us to the end of another Hong Kong Confidential podcast. I'm Jules Hannaford. Thanks for joining me, and I hope you'll be with me again next week. If you enjoyed today's podcast, please can you go to iTunes to rate and review it? I would really appreciate your feedback. You can email me at jules@hongkongconfidential.net, and you can find me on Facebook and Instagram at Hong Kong Confidential. If you'd like to hit me up on Twitter, it's at Jules Hannaford. I would love to hear from you.
Love this podcast? Support it and sponsor today. Simply head to AuscastNetwork.com for details.